The Ossuary Bloom, Chapter 1, Stillness Upon You. The darkness in the crawl space was a physical weight. It pressed on Aris's chest, thick with the cloying sweetness of decay and the sharp, metallic tang of recycled water. Condensation dripped from a fat, insulated pipe above, each drop landing on a rusted deck plate with a rhythmic plink that sounded like a failing clock. A sliver of blue emergency light bled through a ventilation grate in the ceiling, striping their 3 tense figures in the grime and shadows. He watched the light play across Hroldar scarred knuckles. The scavenger was hunched like a gargoyle, his back to a web of corroded conduits, his gaze fixed on the third member of their desperate party, Vespera. She sat as far from Hroldar as the cramped space allowed, her posture a rigid mockery of the disciplined calm she was trained to project. The pristine gray fabric of her architect-issued tunic was smeared with filth, a dark stain of rust blooming over one knee. She stared at her hands, her face a pale oval in the gloom, looking as though she'd just discovered they were alien appendages. She was a creature of sterile labs and whispered authority, now trapped in the station's grimy guts. "Sst! You smell that?" Hroldar voice was a low growl, scraping the silence. "That's the stink of a lie, freshly told." Vespera's head snapped up, her eyes flashing in the dim light. "I have lied to no one." Her voice was tight, the practiced modulation of an architect-technician cracking under the strain. "I helped you escape. I violated every protocol of my order." "You helped him," Hroldar grunted, jabbing a thumb toward Aris, "because that thing wore his wife's face and spoke with your grandmother's voice. Don't mistake a fit of existential panic for an alliance. Lapdog." The slur hung in the humid air. Vespera flinched as if struck. "The Great Stillness is a lie. The Harmonization, what they do, it is not about order. It is erasure." "Took you long enough, didn't it?" Hroldar leaned forward, his shadow swallowing her. "How many glitches have you cleansed? How many families have you helped make echo lost? And now that it's touched you, suddenly your conscience awakens? Stillness upon you."
Aris barely heard them. Their bickering was a distant hum, a meaningless frequency beneath the signal that still thrummed in his bones. Lyra. During the botched harmonization, when the system had overloaded, she had been there. Not just the flickering silhouette he'd seen in the ossuary, but something more, a presence. Her form, impossibly solid, had reached for him. He had felt the charge in the air, the pressure against his own mind. It was real. It had to be. "This is how you get her back," a voice in his head whispered. A voice that sounded dangerously like his own ambition. "She's a risk," Hroldar pressed on, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp meant only for Aris. "She knows their protocols, their bolt holes. The moment they offer her a deal, a way back to her clean little life, she'll trade us for a memory wipe and a promotion." "I have no life to go back to," Vespera said, her voice hollow. "They saw me. They know I let you go. The custodian will have already signed the order. I am a blank." Aris looked at her then. Truly looked. He saw not an architect, but a reflection of his own desperation. A disgraced scientist and a traitorous technician huddled in the dark with a cynical scavenger. a grim punchline to a joke no one was telling. The memory of the data chip Hroldar had found burned in his mind. The corrupted audio file. Lyra's voice. Not him. A name he didn't recognize. It didn't matter. It was her voice. Another piece of the puzzle. Another breadcrumb leading him back to her. He's right, Aris said suddenly. The other two fell silent, turning to him. What? Vespera's voice was a bare whisper. Hroldar is right. You are a risk, Aris stated, his gaze unflinching. And he nodded to the scavenger, is a liability. He trusts no one and would sell us both for an extra ration pack if he thought it would buy him another day. And me, I let out a dry, mirthless laugh. I am a ghost chasing another ghost. We are a pathetic, untrustworthy mess. And we are all each other has. He pushed himself away from the wall, the motion cramped and awkward. The bioluminescent fungi growing in a damp corner cast a sickly green glow on his face.
Listen. He held up a hand. The low, omnipresent hum of the station's life support seemed to grow louder. The drip of water continued its maddening rhythm. That's the sound of them deleting us. Right now, architect kill teams are being dispatched, not to arrest us, to cleanse us. They'll corner us, hit us with a harmonization field so strong it will boil the memories from our skulls and then log our deaths as a power surge accident. There will be no record we ever existed. He let the reality of his words sink in, a cold weight in the suffocating space. You called the resonance a conversation, Vespera, Aris continued, his voice lowering, becoming fervent. You're right, it is, and the architects have been trying to silence it, to censor it. That wave we felt, the one that used Lyra's memory and your grandmother's, that was it fighting back. That was the proof. He turned to Hroldar. That chip you found wasn't a mistake. It's a message. It's all connected. Hroldar grunted, unconvinced but listening. Vespera was staring at Aris, her earlier fear transmuting into something else, a fragile, terrifying focus. They are afraid of the truth, Aris said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And on this station, there is only one place where truth still exists uncorrupted, where the original sins of Ethelgard are stored, the foundational data, the history they have spent a century rewriting. He looked from Vespera's pale, determined face to Hroldar's grim, skeptical scowl. He saw the apprehension warring with the primal instinct to survive. He had them. The architects have marked us for oblivion, Aris declared, his voice ringing with a zealot certainty. Our paranoia, our distrust, that's what they are counting on. They expect us to turn on each other, to die alone in the dark. We have one chance, one. We stop running from them, and we start running towards the one thing they are terrified of. The archives, Vespera breathed, the name an exhalation of blasphemy and hope. The archives beneath the ossuary, Hroldar finished, a grim understanding dawning in his eyes. He spat on the grated floor. Your echo lost, Thorn. That's the most secure place on this entire rust bucket. Yes, Aris agreed, a thin, manic smile touching his lips for the first time. It is, and we are going to break in and steal it all.
The drip from the pipe above seemed to stop. In the sudden, profound silence, the sheer impossibility of the task settled over them. It was no longer a matter of trust or animosity. It was a shared death sentence, or a shared desperate prayer. For the first time, they were not three fugitives. They were a conspiracy. The crawl space was a metallic throat, tight and cold. We lay on a grated catwalk, the void of a service shaft dropping away into echoing blackness beneath us. The air, thick with the tang of ozone and the cloying sweetness of distant formaldehyde, clung to my lungs like a wet shroud. Hroldar was a hulking shadow to my left, his breathing a low, steady rasp. Vespera, a few feet away, was a study in stillness, a ghost in the gloom, her face illuminated only by the faint pulsing blue of a junction box on the far wall. My own personal terminal lay dark in my hands, but the audio file was branded onto my mind, a single corrupted fragment, Lyra's voice, whispering a name, not mine. The sound was a shard of ice in my gut, twisting with every rhythmic drip of condensation that fell from a corroded pipe overhead. It was a poison, and the only antidote was the truth. The foundational data, I said, my voice a harsh whisper that was immediately swallowed by the hum of the station. You said the archive is beneath the ossuary. But how? The public schematics are a joke. They're designed to keep people out, not let them in. Hroldar shifted, the grating protesting with a low groan. A joke? They're a slaughterhouse map, Doc. They don't just keep you out. They guide you, right into a security patrol's arms or an unscheduled atmospheric flush. We walk in there following a public schematic, we'll be nutrient paste for the rust gardens before we see the first cryopod. His cynicism was a physical thing, another layer of grime in the already filthy air. But he wasn't wrong. The thought sent a fresh tremor through me, one that had nothing to do with the station's low constant vibration. He's right, Vespera's voice cut through the dark, precise and cold as a scalpel. The active schematics are a living defense system, layered with misinformation. The architect's security protocols reroute patrol routes, access codes, even physical layouts on a randomized cycle. Chasing the current map is a fool's errand.
I looked towards her silhouette. Then what? We give up? Let them keep their secrets? The name echoed in my head. Darian. Who was Darian? No, she said. The word was absolute. We don't chase the living map. We hunt the dead one. The station's core infrastructure is immutable. The conduits, the primary structural supports, the deep-level access shafts, they can't be moved. The original ossuary was different. Before it was just a mausoleum, it was the primary xenobiology and neural research facility for the Kepler 186F colonization project. There are entire sectors down there that have been sealed, purged from the network, and erased from official memory. A patch of eerie, blue-green bioluminescent fungus on the wall next to her cast her face in a sickly, ethereal glow. Her eyes were dark, bottomless pits. To get to the archive, we can't use the halls. We must use the gaps, the forgotten arteries of this station. And for that, we need a map not of what is, but of what was. From the founding? I asked, a sliver of scientific curiosity piercing the fog of my grief. A 200-year-old blueprint? They're rarer than authentic memories, Hroldar grunted, and probably just as corrupted. A blueprint would be useless, Vespera corrected him, her tone dismissing his pragmatism. Too much has been retrofitted, too many systems built on top of the old bones. No, we don't need a document. We need a cartographer, a ghost. I waited, the hum of the station filling the silence. The dripping seemed to grow louder, a maddeningly slow clock counting down our chances. There was a man, Vespera began, her voice dropping even lower. An architect, a historian and systems theorist. I studied his work during my initial training. His name is Valerius Otho. I felt a cold rejection. An architect? You want us to trust an architect? After what we just saw? After what they did to you? They didn't do this to me, she said, her voice dangerously level. They revealed themselves. There is a difference. Otho was one of them, but he was exiled decades ago, stripped of his title, his access, his identity. He became echo-lost by official decree. Why? Hroldar asked, his usual cynicism replaced by a flicker of genuine interest. Vespera turned her head, her gaze seeming to pass right through me, into the haunted depths of the ossuary miles below. Heresy. He violated the core tenet of the Great Stillness. Otho's obsession was the station's foundational code, the oldest, deepest systems. He began to notice patterns in the so-called neural feedback from the ossuary levels, the glitches, the resonance events. My breath caught in my chest. I leaned forward, the cold metal of the catwalk pressing into my palms. He didn't believe they were system errors, Vespera continued. He theorized they were structured data, a coherent signal attempting to find a receiver. He published a paper suggesting resonance wasn't a corruption to be cleansed, but a language to be deciphered. The council declared him mentally unstable, a threat to tranquility. They subjected him to 3 cycles of harmonization, but it didn't take. His conviction was too strong. So they erased him from the system and threw him out into the lower levels to rot. A language. The word struck me like a physical blow. The flickering shape of Lyra, her voice. It wasn't just a ghost. It was a message. Otho. Hroldar's voice was a low rumble. He scraped a hand over his jaw, the sound like sandpaper. Valerius Otho. I know that name. It's a bogeyman story the dregs tell their kids in the rust gardens, the mad architect who listens to the static between worlds. He let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. They say he never left, that he haunts the underbelly, that if you have something he wants, you can find him. I felt a shift in the tiny, cramped space. The oppressive weight of our desperation began to recede, replaced by something sharp and brittle. A plan. A single, impossibly dangerous thread to pull. "Find him where?" I demanded. Hroldar's silhouette turned toward me. Even in the near-total darkness, I could feel the weight of his stare. There's only one place a ghost like that could survive, trading secrets for synth ale and battery packs. A place the architects pretend doesn't exist, so they don't have to admit they can't control it. "Where?" Vespera asked, her voice tight with a tension that betrayed her disciplined exterior. A low metallic clang echoed up from the shaft below, making all of us freeze. We waited, hearts hammering against ribs. Hroldar finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "The Umbral Bazaar. The black market that festers in the decommissioned transport nexus beneath Viridia Spire." He paused, then added, "It's not a place for the well-kept like you two. It'll chew you up and spit out your bones for a few echoes." The name in my head, Darien, was no longer just a wound. It was a question. And Valerius Otho, the heretic who believed in a language of the dead, might just be the only person on this decaying station who could provide a translation. The despair that had been choking me for hours finally hardened into a cold, sharp point of determination. "Then that's where we're going," I said, the words feeling like a vow in the dark. "Hroldar, Take us to the umbral bazaar. The crawl space was a tomb in miniature, a forgotten vein between the ossified arteries of Aethelgard. Rusted latticework pressed in on all sides, slick with a film of condensation that smelled of metal and something sickly sweet, like flowers left to rot in stagnant water. A single emergency light, a dozen meters down the passage, pulsed a weak, rhythmic gold, casting their shadows as long, distorted specters. The station's ubiquitous hum was deeper here, a bass vibration that Aris felt in his teeth. Hroldar grunted, his thick fingers testing the corroded bolts on a maintenance panel. This conduit should drop us near the lower transit hub. From there, we can get lost in the dreg warrens before they even know we're gone. His voice was a gravelly rasp, full of a survivor's confidence that felt flimsy in the oppressive silence. Aris nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He was still seeing the after-image burned onto his retina, a figure of shimmering static, a silhouette of impossible familiarity, a voice like shattered glass whispering a name. Lyra. The memory was a hook, and his obsession was the line, pulling him deeper into this suffocating darkness. The data chip in his pocket felt both impossibly heavy and feather-light, a paradox of potential and dread. He was a scientist on the precipice of a discovery that could redefine life itself, or a madman chasing a ghost. He no longer knew the difference. "We move now," Hroldar declared, giving one of the bolts a final decisive twist. "Stop." The word was not loud, but it cut through the air like a shard of ice. Vespera, who had been a silent, compact shape of disciplined stillness, shifted in the narrow space. Her face, half lit by the distant flickering light, was a pale, unreadable mask. "We're exposed here, Architect," Hroldar growled, his hand not leaving the panel. "The longer we wait, the more time they have to find the gap in their little cage." "You're thinking like a thief," Vespera said. Her tone was flat, clinical, the sound of a diagnostician identifying a fatal symptom. "You believe the response to your unsanctioned access will be a security patrol. You assume they want to capture you." Aris felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. Her placid certainty was more unnerving than any of Hroldar brusque warnings. "They don't?" he asked. Vespera turned her head slowly, her dark eyes finding his in the gloom. "Detention creates a record. A record is memory. The architects do not believe in leaving uncontrolled memories. You have trespassed in a quarantined zone and allied yourself with a known subversive. This is not a matter for station security." Sanitation. The word was sterile, clean, utterly devoid of the filth it implied. Hroldar let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sanitation? They gonna mop the floor with us?" "No," Vespera replied, her voice dropping a fraction, becoming almost instructional. "They will deploy a sanitization team. 2 members, sometimes 3, if the target is deemed ideologically volatile. They won't be wearing the gray uniforms of station security. They will wear the sealed off-white environment suits of the Ossuary's echo suppression unit. The same unit Aris had seen, the ones who had cleansed Lyra's echo with brutal, silent efficiency. Their mandate is not containment, it is erasure. They won't announce themselves. You won't hear a command to halt. The first thing you will experience is a pressure in your sinuses and the faint smell of ozone. The lights will flicker as their primary tool draws power from the local grid. She paused, letting the image form in the suffocating quiet of the crawl space. Aris could hear his own heartbeat, a frantic drum against the station's slow, grinding hum. They carry high-frequency emitters, the same ones used to disperse resonance phenomena. At range, they disrupt the semi-corporeal matrix of an echo. At close range, on a living subject with a neural implant, the effect is different. Hroldar had gone rigid, his hand frozen on the rusted panel. Even his cynical swagger had evaporated, replaced by the stillness of an animal that has heard the predator in the grass. The frequency is tuned to induce a catastrophic feedback loop in the implant's microcircuitry, Vespera explained. She spoke as if reading from a technical manual she had memorized, or perhaps written herself. It causes an instantaneous and irreversible cognitive cascade. It doesn't just wipe your memory, it scrambles the fundamental neural pathways that create the concept of self. Your thoughts, your history, your name, your ability to process language or recognize a face. It all collapses into undifferentiated neurological static in less than a second. The initial determination Aris had felt was shriveling, replaced by a cold, intellectual terror. This wasn't a bullet to the brain. This was the methodical deconstruction of a soul, an annihilation more complete than death. They call the process rendering to stillness, Vespera added, her voice a chilling monotone. The body remains. It breathes. The heart beats. But the person is gone, echo lost in the most absolute sense. Aris stared at her, at this young woman who spoke of such horrors with the detached air of a botanist describing cross-pollination. And the body? He managed to ask, his throat dry. It's logged as a biological asset recovered from a system malfunction. It's processed through the reclamation vats in the rust gardens, rendered down to its base components. There is no death certificate, no file deletion. The individual is simply edited out of existence. They never were. That is the ultimate expression of the Great Stillness, a silence so perfect, even the memory of the sound is gone. The weight of her words settled in the cramped space, heavier than the station itself. Hroldar slowly, unconsciously brought a hand to the back of his neck, where the crude aftermarket socket of his implant was hidden beneath his collar. His face, illuminated in a brief pulse of light from the emergency lamp, was pale. The fear of a cage was one thing. The fear of being unwritten was another entirely. Aris finally understood. The true power of the architects wasn't their technology or their control of the station. It was their command over reality itself. They could decide who had existed and who had not. The scarcity of authentic memory wasn't a market condition. It was a state-enforced doctrine, and its enforcers carried weapons that killed the past. He looked at Vespera, truly looked at her. He saw the impassive discipline of her order, but beneath it, for the first time, he saw a hairline fracture. He saw the shadow of the things she had done, the sanitations she had witnessed, perhaps even carried out. She was not just their guide, she was a piece of the monster they were trying to escape. "So we're dead," Hroldar stated, his voice flat. "Just a matter of when the ghosts in the white suits find us." "No," Vespera said, a flicker of something new in her eyes. "Not defiance, something colder. Calculation. Their methods are precise, predictable. They will search for anomalies, a bypassed lock, an unscheduled power draw, a life sign where none should be. She gestured back the way they had come, then forward into the deeper dark. You think like fugitives, reacting to the hunters. That is why you will be caught. We will not be fugitives. We will be a system error, a ghost in the machine they cannot find because they are not looking for it. I know their protocols, I know their blind spots, and I know the paths that exist between the lines of their code. She met Aris's gaze, then Hrodar's. The fear she had so expertly instilled in them was still there, a cold knot in Aris's gut. But now it was mingled with a sliver of something else, a terrifying, desperate hope. The heavy plasteel hatch sealed behind them with a deep, groaning thud that echoed into oblivion. Darkness, absolute and suffocating, swallowed them whole. The station's omnipresent hum was gone, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a pressure against Aris's eardrums. The air changed instantly. The sterile, recycled scent of the maintained corridors vanished, supplanted by the thick, cloying sweetness of rot, the sharp, metallic tang of stagnant water, and a low electric hum of ozone that made the hairs on his arms prickle. "Kill the light, architect," a voice rasped from the blackness. Hroldar. A brilliant, sterile beam from Vespera's rust-emitter had sliced through the dark, illuminating a tunnel that seemed to have been clawed from the station's guts. Rusted pipes, thick as a man's torso, wept viscous fluid onto a corroded metal walkway. Cables snaked like dead black veins along walls slick with algae. "We need to see where we're going." Vespera's voice was tight, disciplined, but the edge of unease was unmistakable. "No," Hroldar countered. "We need to not be seen. That thing is a searchlight. Douse it." Aris heard Vespera's sharp intake of breath, a protest dying on her lips. A moment later, the beam winked out. The oppressive darkness returned, now filled with the ghost image of weeping pipes burned onto Aris's retinas. A soft snap, and a sickly green-yellow glow bloomed near the floor. Hroldar had cracked a chemical loom stick. It cast just enough light to paint their surroundings in corpse-like hues, throwing their shadows long and monstrous behind them. "Stay close. Don't touch the walls if you can help it, and watch your step." Hroldar's voice was low, a rumbling whisper. "The floor here, it's a lie in places." He moved with a shuffling, certain gait that belied the treacherous ground. His worn boots seemed to know instinctively where to find purchase, tapping the grated floor ahead of him before committing his weight. Aris followed, his own steps hesitant. He could feel the slight give in the metal beneath his feet, hear the groan of stressed supports. This wasn't the Aethelgard he knew. This was the station's neglected subconscious, a place of pure entropic function, where aesthetics and safety were forgotten luxuries.
Beside him, Vespera moved with a rigid grace that was entirely out of place. Her crisp gray uniform was a stark anomaly against the grime. He saw her flinch as a drop of thick, oily water landed on her shoulder, leaving a dark stain. She was an antibody in a diseased system, and the disease was winning. "The schematics I reviewed showed this conduit as stable," she whispered, her datapad glowing faintly in her hand. Hroldar let out a low, humorless chuckle. "The schematics, right. The pretty little lies the architects tell themselves so they can sleep in their quiet, clean beds." He stopped and pointed with his loom stick at a series of crude symbols scrawled on a support pillar in what looked like nutrient paste. "The station skin sheds," Hroldar said. "The plans are bone deep, and they don't account for the rot in the flesh. This
He tapped the symbol, a crude skull with wavy lines radiating from it, is a real map, a dreg map. Aris leaned closer. He recognized the symbol from xenobiological hazard warnings, but this was a bastardized, desperate version. Radiation? The buzz, Hroldar confirmed. He unhooked a small, battered device from his belt. A series of faint, almost imperceptible clicks began to emanate from it. The old fusion core beneath the gardens. It sings a lullaby. You just don't want to get close enough to hear the whole song. Vespera's face was a mask of cold fury, but Aris saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. This was chaos, unmanaged, unrecorded, undocumented chaos. To an architect, it was the ultimate sin. That reactor was decommissioned. The reports are clear. Clear, are they? Hroldar said, his voice dripping with a cynicism so profound it was almost pitying. Go tell the ghosts in the lower beds how clear the reports were. Now, this way. The buzz is louder to the left. We go right. He led them onto a narrow gantry that stretched over a chasm of indeterminate depth. The constant drip of condensation was louder here, echoing from below like 1,000 tiny hammers. The only light came from Hroldars loom and patches of eerie blue-green bioluminescent fungi clinging to the damp walls, pulsing with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The air was thick with the smell of wet metal and decay. Aris felt a small tightening in his chest. It was a familiar sensation. This was the place where missions went dark, and people disappeared.
Aris's heart hammered against his ribs. His fear of heights, a trivial inconvenience in the spire's grand, secure walkways, was a living thing here. He kept his eyes fixed on Hroldar's back, mimicking his shuffling steps, his hands hovering inches from the corroded railing he didn't dare trust. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the dripping. A rhythmic, metallic clang, distant, but growing steadily closer. Clean, precise, mechanical. Drone. Hroldar hissed, the word a puff of steam in the cold air. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the back of Aris's collar and Vespera's arm, shoving them sideways with surprising strength. In here, now, and don't breathe so loud. Aris stumbled into a recess behind a cluster of enormous weeping pipes. The space was barely large enough for the three of them. He was pressed against a cold, slick surface that smelled foully of chemicals and mold. Vespera was crushed against his side, her rigid posture finally broken. He could feel her trembling, or perhaps it was his own body. The clanging grew louder, accompanied by the whir of servo motors. A brilliant white searchlight sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the gantry just meters from their hiding place. It paused, bathing the opposite wall in clinical light. Aris held his breath. He could see the dust motes dancing in the beam, each one a potential betrayal. He watched Hroldar. The scavenger was utterly still, his eyes narrowed, a predator in his own squalid jungle. This was his world. He wasn't afraid of the dark, or the rot, or the fall. He was afraid of the light. He was afraid of the sterile, murderous order that Vespera had, until hours ago, represented. The drone's light swept past. The clanging and whirring receded, fading back into the symphony of drips and groans. Hroldar waited a full minute before moving. Clear, he grunted, pushing himself out of the recess. Aris followed, his legs unsteady. Vespera emerged last, a dark smear of grime tracing a line down her cheekbone, her knuckles white where she gripped her dormant data pad. She didn't wipe the smudge away. She looked at Hroldar, her expression stripped of its certitude, leaving something raw and uncertain in its place.
The fear in Aris's chest hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer the paralyzing dread of the unknown. It was the sharp, focused fear of the hunted. And looking at the grizzled scavenger, he felt a sliver of something he hadn't expected, a grudging, profound respect. Hroldar wasn't just a guide, he was an anchor in this sea of decay. Hroldar didn't seem to notice or care. He was already moving again, his loom stick a lonely star in the oppressive gloom. "This way," he said, his voice echoing slightly in a new, wider tunnel. "We're getting close to the garden's roots. It'll smell worse before it smells better." Aris glanced from the scavenger's determined back to Vespera's haunted profile. A disgraced scientist, a fallen architect, and a king of the rust and ruin. An impossible alliance, held together by a shared enemy and the simple, brutal fact that in this part of Ethelgard, Hroldar Brecker was the only one who knew how to stay alive. The service tunnel stank of ozone and wet rust. It was a smell Aris had come to associate with the station's deepest veins, a metallic perfume of slow, inevitable decay. Water, slick with a film of machine oil, dripped from bundled pipes overhead, each drop landing on the grated metal floor with a hollow chime that echoed into the oppressive dimness. Their only light came from emergency strips casting a weak, anemic blue glow, and the occasional patch of eerie phosphorescent fungus clinging to the damp walls like a pale green sickness. Hroldar moved ahead of them, a hulking shadow whose silence was more unnerving than any noise. His heavy boots made no sound, a lifetime of scavenging in the station's forgotten corners having taught him a predator's grace. Vespera followed, her posture rigid, her gaze sweeping the tunnel with the detached analysis of a security sensor. She walked as if the grime and decay were a personal affront to her sense of order. Aris brought up the rear, his thoughts a chaotic swirl. The image from the ossuary, the flickering silhouette of his wife, Lyra, coalescing from the data stream of a dying mind, was burned onto the back of his eyelids. The corrupted audio chip he'd retrieved was a lead weight in his pocket, Lyra's voice whispering another man's name. A ghost in the machine. A ghost in his head. "Hold." Hroldar voice was a low growl that barely disturbed the air. He'd stopped at a junction where the tunnel branched into 3 identical dark maws. Near the central path, a thick power conduit, its casing cracked and peeling, shuddered violently. A shower of brilliant white sparks erupted from a fracture, spitting and crackling like angry insects. The emergency light strips along the ceiling flickered, died, then flared back to life in a nauseating strobe. "Coronal discharge," Vespera stated, her voice flat. She didn't even flinch. "Kepler 186F is in an active phase. The station's magnetic shielding is degrading, especially in these older sectors. It's inducing current fluctuations in unshielded systems." Hroldar grunted. "Technical words for bad news. Fluctuations draw attention." As he spoke, the strobe effect intensified. The blue lights died completely, plunging them into absolute blackness for a full second. Aris's breath caught in his throat. Then, not all the lights returned. One wall remained dark, except for a large rectangular panel that sputtered to life with a hiss of static. It was an old holographic advertisement plate, long dormant. The static coalesced into a fuzzy, distorted image. It was a corporate logo for Viridia Spire Estates, a promise of luxury living now a century out of date. The logo glitched, dissolving into a waterfall of digital snow. It tried to reform, but the power surge was ravaging the display's logic. "Just a short," Hroldar muttered, already turning to scout the left-hand tunnel. "It'll pass." Vespera was watching the conduit, her expression one of mild annoyance, as if observing a misbehaving appliance. "The system will reroute. It's inefficient, but it will hold." But Aris couldn't look away from the panel. He wasn't seeing an advertisement or a system failure. He was seeing a pattern in the noise, a shape. The static was like a swarm of digital motes, and they were trying to build something. A face. "No, don't do this to yourself. It's pareidolia. Your brain is desperate, so it's forging connections where none exist." He tried to force the thought down, to cling to the cold shores of logic, but the tide of his obsession was too strong. The static flickered again violently, and for a single, heart-stopping moment, the image clarified. It was Lyra.
Not the perfect, smiling woman from his archived photos, but a broken, fragmented version. Her face was constructed from shimmering, unstable pixels, her hair a cascade of corrupted data. One side of her face was sharp, almost real, her high cheekbone, the precise curve of her jaw, the dark, intelligent eye that had always seemed to look right through him. The other side was a smear of glitching colors, a chaotic mess of green and magenta that refused to resolve. It was like looking at a memory through shattered glass. Aris froze, his feet rooted to the grate. The dripping water, the hum of the station, the very presence of Hroldar and Vespera, it all faded away. There was only the static and her face within it. Her lips, impossibly, were moving. They formed silent words, a desperate, soundless plea. He saw the shape of his name on them. Aris. He felt a physical blow to his chest, a hollow ache of grief and a terrible soaring hope. It wasn't just in his head. It wasn't just a memory. She was there. She was reaching for him across the void, through the station's dying nervous system. This was resonance, raw, unfiltered, manifesting in the ghost of a dead machine. "Aris," he whispered, the sound a dry rasp. He took a half-step toward the wall, his hand unconsciously reaching out. "What are you doing?" Vespera's sharp voice cut through his trance like a scalpel. He flinched, the spell broken. As he looked away, the image on the panel collapsed. Lyra's face dissolved back into a meaningless blizzard of static, and then, with a final, pathetic pop, the holographic plate went dark. The blue emergency lights stabilized, casting the junction in their cold, sterile glow once more. The moment was gone. The conduit still sparked intermittently, a lonely rhythmic crackle in the renewed silence. Aris stared at the blank panel, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could still see her face imprinted on the darkness. Did you see that?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Vespera turned her gaze from the conduit to him, her expression unreadable. "See what? A power surge affecting a defunct advertising node? As I said, a coronal mass discharge. The EM field can cause legacy displays to momentarily activate and pull ghost data from the local buffer. It's random noise."
Random noise. The words felt like a slap. He looked from her cold, analytical face to the dead panel. She hadn't seen it, or she refused to. To her, it was a glitch, an entry in a logbook. To him, it was a miracle. He turned to Hroldar, a desperate plea in his eyes. The big man was peering down the right-hand tunnel, his body tense. He glanced back over his shoulder, his face etched with impatience, not wonder. "I see a light show that tells every architect patrol in this sector that something is wrong right here, Hroldar said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He jabbed a thumb down the tunnel. "And I hear the hum of a maintenance drone getting closer. We move. Now." Aris felt a wave of dizzying confusion. The Vespera's logic was sound. Hroldar's warning was practical. But what he had seen, it had felt more real than either of them. The silent movement of Lyra's lips, the desperation in her one good eye. It was a truth his body recognized, even if his mind couldn't prove it. Hroldar didn't wait for an answer. He moved into the darkness of the left tunnel, a ghost swallowed by shadows. The Vespera gave Aris one last look, a flicker of something, pity, frustration, in her eyes, before she followed him. Aris was alone in the junction. The air still smelled of ozone. The conduit sparked again, a final defiant flash. He looked at the black, lifeless panel, his hand still half raised. Was he echo-lost? Was his grief finally fracturing his sanity, projecting itself onto the station's decay? Or was he the only one willing to see the truth hiding in the static? He didn't know, and the not knowing was the most terrifying thing of all. With a shuddering breath, he lowered his hand and plunged into the darkness after the others.
The sanitation conduit was a vein of rust and shadow, a vast cyclopean artery that ran through Aethelgard's forgotten guts. The air, thick with the metallic reek of recycled water and the sweet, sickly perfume of chemical decay, coated the back of Aris's throat. A constant low hum vibrated through the grated floor, the death rattle of ancient machinery. For the first time since leaving the relative order of the technocrat levels, a sliver of confidence had begun to knit itself together in his chest. Hroldar moved with a predator's economy, his heavy boots making almost no sound on the corroded metal, and Vespera, a silent shadow at Aris's shoulder, was a pillar of taut discipline. They were a strange, fractured unit, but they were moving. That confidence evaporated like spilled water in a vacuum chamber. As they rounded a wide bend where the conduit swelled like an aneurysm, Hrodar's hand shot out, palm flat, halting them. Aris froze, his heart instantly a cold, heavy stone in his gut. Ahead, a barricade. It was a miserable, desperate thing, a heap of scrap plating, tangled conduits, and a non-functional maintenance drone, its single optic eye dark and vacant. Patches of eerie, blue-green fungus clung to the metal, casting the figures manning it in a ghastly underwater light. There were 4 of them. Dregs, by their patched rags and the gaunt, hungry look in their eyes. They clutched weapons that were more scrap than tool, sharpened pipes, a heavy-duty rivet gun that looked dangerously unstable, and a vibro-knife that whined with a pained, uneven tremor. One of them, a woman with a face like cracked porcelain and hair shorn into a ragged gray fuzz, stood slightly forward. Her authority was clear in her stillness, in the way the others watched her, not Hroldar. "Stay put," Hroldar breathed, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He didn't look at Aris or Vespera, his gaze fixed on the barricade. Not a word, not a twitch. He then moved forward, his posture shifting from a hunter's stalk to something else, a casual, almost weary slouch. He kept his hands open and away from his sides, a universal sign of non-aggression that felt utterly dissonant in this place of jagged edges. Aris's breath hitched. He could feel the Vespera's tension beside him, the minute stiffening of her spine. She was a creature of the spire, of protocols and quiet authority backed by the architect's power. This was anarchy. This was the station's true ecosystem, red in tooth and claw.
"Stillness upon you," Hroldar called out, his voice echoing slightly in the immense pipe. It was the formal greeting of the upper levels, a bitter irony that dripped from his tongue. The woman at the barricade did not return the pleasantry. Her lips, chapped and pale, peeled back from grayish teeth. "Stillness is a luxury, rust dweller. Passage is not." Her voice was a file on rough metal. "Pipes closed. Toll required." "Just passing through, Anya," Hroldar said, his tone even. He knew her. Of course he knew her. Aris felt a fresh wave of anxiety. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a transaction in a world with rules he couldn't begin to fathom. "Heading for the lower intakes. No cargo, no trouble." One of the men behind her, a skeletal figure with a scavenged gas mask dangling from his neck, took a step forward, brandishing his sharpened pipe. "Everyone's got trouble, and everything is cargo." He jabbed the pipe in their direction. "Especially a clean-cut technocrat and his architect pet." Aris flinched. Vespera's face remained a mask, but he saw her knuckles whiten where she gripped the strap of her satchel. They were marked. Their relative cleanliness, their less tattered clothes, it was a beacon. "There with me," Hroldar said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its casual air and gaining a hard, flinty edge. "My business, my protection. You have a problem with that? You have a problem with me. We all know how that ends. And we all know the rust gardens bleed south. Your water purifiers still working?" It was a threat, subtle and sharp as a needle, a reminder of supply lines, of dependencies. Aris watched, mesmerized by the ugly ballet. This was Hroldar's world. He wasn't just a guide, he was a player, a piece on the board with his own weight and history. Anya's eyes narrowed.
Hroldar was silent for a long moment. Aris could practically hear the gears turning in the scavenger's head, calculating risks, weighing losses. His own mind raced. What did they have? The data chip was worthless to these people. Their few nutrient-paced packets were a pittance. He looked at Vespera, whose face was a blank slate of disciplined non-reaction, but her eyes, wide in the fungal glow, were locked on Hroldar. She was just as powerless as he was. Then, with a heavy, deliberate movement, Hroldar reached into the deep pocket of his coat. The men at the barricade tensed, their grips tightening on their weapons. The whine of the vibro knife pitched higher. Hroldar ignored them, his movements slow and predictable. He withdrew a small, dense cylinder of polished alloy and ceramic, no bigger than his fist. It was clean, meticulously maintained. A faint blue light pulsed from a seam in its side. "A Series 7 Aqua Pura," Hroldar said, his voice flat with a loss Aris could feel but not yet comprehend. "Military grade. Filters 99.9% of biological and chemical contaminants. Good for 10,000 liters before the catalyst needs a clean." Aris's blood ran cold. A water filter. Not just any filter. In a station where every drop was recycled 1,000 times, where rust rot and bacterial blooms were a constant threat, pure water was life. It was worth more than echoes, more than most black market tech. And from the way Hroldar held it, the way his thumb brushed over its smooth casing, Aris knew it was a deep personal loss. This wasn't just a bargaining chip. It was part of his survival. The skeletal man's eyes widened, his gaze locked on the device. Even Anya, the hard-faced leader, seemed to lose her composure for a fraction of a second. Her predatory focus softened into raw, naked want. "Toss it over," she rasped, her voice suddenly strained. Hroldar let out a short, humorless sound, a dry puff of air.
Ha ha! I'm not an idiot, Anya. I come halfway, you get it, we pass. No one gets an extra hole in him today. She hesitated. Fine, Anya finally bit out. She gestured with her head, and the men reluctantly parted the barricade just enough for a single person to squeeze through. Hroldar walked forward, the filter held out on his flat palm. He stopped in the no-man's land between the two groups. Anya met him there. She snatched the filter, her thin fingers closing around it with possessive speed. She turned it over and over, her eyes tracing its construction, her expression a mixture of disbelief and avarice. She held it to her ear, listening to the faint, almost inaudible hum of its internal mechanisms. Satisfied, she gave a curt nod. Go. Hroldar didn't need to be told twice. He turned his back on them, an act of supreme, calculated confidence, and walked back to Aris and Vespera. Move, he muttered, his voice tight. Now. They shuffled forward single file through the narrow gap in the barricade. Aris kept his eyes forward, but he could feel the scavengers' gazes on his back, heavy and cold. He could smell their desperation, a scent of unwashed bodies, malnutrition, and bitter resentment. As they passed the last of them, he chanced to glance back. Anya was holding the water filter like a holy relic, her face illuminated by its soft blue glow. For a moment, she wasn't a predator. She was just a woman who had secured another day of clean water for her people. They were 20 meters down the conduit before Hroldar spoke again, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. That filter saw me through the gray blight in the lower gardens. Kept my daughter alive for 6 months longer than she should have. Aris stopped, turning to face him. The words hung in the damp air, impossibly heavy. Hroldar didn't look at him. He just stared ahead into the oppressive gloom. Everything has a price down here, Doctor. Everything. Don't you ever forget it. And with that, he continued walking, leaving Aris standing in the echoing darkness, the true cost of their passage settling over him like a shroud. The pressure-sealed hatch Hroldar wrenched open didn't hiss like the station's maintained portals. It groaned, a long metallic protest against the decay that held it fast. For a moment, there was only the familiar stagnant air of the service conduit they'd been crawling through, the scent of cold metal and ozone. Aris took what he thought was a preparatory breath, a small moment of relief before the next phase of their insane plan. The breath caught in his throat, stolen by a tidal wave of sensory chaos that crashed over them. It was as if the station's skin had been peeled back to reveal a writhing, incandescent knot of life. Sound struck first. Not the predictable hum of life support or the funereal drip of condensation, but a roar. A dense, wet blanket of noise woven from 1,000 haggling voices, the percussive clang of metal on metal, the distorted thrum of a synth-heavy dirge leaking from unseen speakers, and the sizzle of food being cooked on open heat plates. It was the sound of humanity, raw and unfiltered, and it was utterly alien. Then came the light and the smell. Before them lay a chasm, a decommissioned cargo bay so vast its far wall was lost in shadow and smog. A multi-level shantytown had grown within it like a crystalline fungus, a vertical sprawl of scavenged platforms, rusted mesh walkways, and cubicles welded directly onto the bay's Gothic support arches. Strings of bare bulbs and flickering neon tubes in lurid shades of pink and acid green crisscrossed the void, casting a million dancing shadows. The air was thick and heavy, a cloying stew of frying oil, unwashed bodies, soldering fumes, and something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot. It clawed at the back of Aris's throat, a world away from the sterile formaldehyde-tinged air of the ossuary. "Welcome to the umbral bazaar," Hroldar grunted, his voice nearly swallowed by the din. He gestured with a sweep of his arm, a ringmaster presenting his squalid circus. "The only place on this rust bucket where the Great Stillness is a joke nobody's telling."
Aris felt Vespera tense beside him. He didn't need to look at her to know the expression on her face. He could feel her revulsion radiating from her like a chill. This place was the antithesis of her entire existence, a living monument to the chaos the architects sought to suppress. It was disorder made manifest. To Aris, it was overwhelming. His mind, accustomed to data streams and sterile labs, struggled to parse the input. It was like staring into a supernova of pure disorganized information. People swarmed through the narrow thoroughfares below. Dregs in patched-up coveralls, their faces smudged with grime. Technicians with their jackets turned inside out, hoping to go unrecognized. Looming figures with crude, exposed cybernetics, gleaming pistons grafted to flesh, optical sensors glowing red in darkened stalls. And guards, men and women with scarred faces and assault rifles, held with casual menace, their eyes constantly sweeping the crowds. "Stay close. Don't talk to anyone. Don't look anyone in the eye for more than a second," Hroldar commanded, his voice a low growl that cut through the noise. "And for the architect's sake, try not to look like you just crawled out of a cryopod." Aris swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, of being an exhibit in a zoo. His clean, functional jumpsuit felt like a costume. He glanced at Vespera. Her posture was ramrod straight, her jaw tight, her gaze darting from one potential threat to the next, a security assessment protocol running on pure instinct. She was a predator in a pristine cage suddenly dropped into a savage jungle. And she was terrified. "Just walk," Hroldar muttered, giving Aris a rough shove forward onto a rickety metal gangway that descended into the maelstrom. The walkway swayed under their weight, groaning in time with the distant music. As they descended, the bazaar resolved into sharper, more disturbing detail. A man with a filigreed neural jack gleaming at his temple sat cross-legged, hawking what looked like slivers of polished bone. Memories, fresh pooled, a first kiss, a final breath, authenticity guaranteed, his holographic sign flickered. Further on, a woman with milky, blind eyes offered untraceable neural implants from a stained velvet cloth. Aris saw a customer, a kid no older than 16, hand over a stack of echoes. The woman picked up a wicked-looking stylus and without a word began carving into the boy's scalp right there in the open. Vespera flinched, a barely perceptible tremor that Aris caught. Her training, her entire ideology was predicated on the sterile, controlled application of this technology. To see it used so crudely, so personally, was a violation. "That's what your precious order calls corruption," Hroldar said, noticing her gaze. There was no malice in his tone, just a flat statement of fact. "Much better to have it done in a quiet room where you can't hear the screaming, right?" Vespera didn't answer. She just pulled the collar of her jacket higher, as if to shield herself from the market's moral filth. Aris felt a surge of anxiety, a cold prickling on his skin that had nothing to do with the temperature. Everyone here was a ghost of a different sort. Not the ethereal echoes of the ossuary, but living ghosts, hollowed out by desperation, trading pieces of their past and future just to survive another cycle. He saw the same haunted look in their eyes that he saw in his own reflection. He had come here for a piece of forbidden technology, a key to unlock the mystery of Lyra's echo. But was he any different from the boy getting a back-alley implant? Weren't they both just chasing a phantom? A hulking figure, his face a roadmap of scars, bumped hard into Aris's shoulder, nearly sending him over the railing. The man didn't even look back. Aris's heart hammered against his ribs. "Eyes forward, Doctor." Hroldar's voice was a sharp command in his ear. "You're broadcasting fear like a distress beacon." Aris forced himself to look ahead, to focus on Hroldar's broad back as he navigated the crush of Baris. He tried to compartmentalize, to be the scientist. He noted the bioluminescent fungi growing in damp patches on the original station walls, casting an eerie blue-green glow that contrasted with the garish neon. He saw the automated maintenance drones, their hulls painted with crude symbols, repurposed to haul cargo for the highest bidder. The entire ecosystem was a parasitic adaptation, a testament to life's desperate, ugly persistence.
They descended another level, the air growing hotter and thicker. The music was louder here, a pounding industrial beat that vibrated up through the soles of his boots. They passed a stall where a technician was jury-rigging a high-frequency emitter, the same kind of weapon the architects had used to disperse Lyra's echo to a portable power cell. The sight sent a jolt of ice through Aris's veins. The tools of suppression were being sold as weapons. Here, there were no rules, only transactions. Finally, Hroldar stopped. He led them down a narrow, darkened alleyway between two towering stacks of makeshift habitats. The roar of the bazaar subsided to a muffled pulse. The only light came from a single sputtering bulb overhead, revealing a heavy, rust-streaked door. A faded symbol was painted on it, a stylized serpent eating its own tail, looped around a cracked data chip. "This is it," Hroldar said, his voice low. He looked from Aris to Vespera, his expression grim. "Our guy's name is Kaelus. He's an echo-lost engineer, cast out by your people years ago." He fixed his gaze on Vespera. "He doesn't like architects, so you don't speak, you don't move, you barely breathe. Got it?" Vespera gave a single curt nod, her face a pale, emotionless mask. Aris just stared at the door. He could feel a low hum vibrating through the metal, a current of illicit power. Behind this door was a man who dealt in forbidden knowledge, the kind of man who could build the device he needed, a man who could help him speak to a ghost. The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. He had left the regulated sanity of the spire and descended into the station's id, and there was no turning back. The bazaar was a wound in Aethelgard's gut, a chaotic nexus of shadow and need carved into the service corridors between the Rust Gardens and Viridia Spire. From Vespera's perspective, it was an offense to logic. Order had been bled out and replaced with a babble of haggling voices, the sizzle of unsanctioned food synthesizers, and the omnipresent, cloying sweetness of decay. Here, the station's constant hum was a fractured thing, riddled with the static of jury-rigged comms and the desperate energy of the dregs. She, Aris, and Hroldar stood in the relative dark of a defunct ventilation shaft, watching their target.
The information broker's stall was less a shop and more a burrow, a recess in the station's metal flesh piled high with salvaged server racks and dark-screened monitors. A single flickering strip of blue neon cast the entrance in a sickly pallor, but failed to penetrate the gloom within. All Vespera could see was a shape, a figure swathed in a heavy hooded robe, sitting perfectly still on a crate, a predator waiting for prey. Hroldar spat a wad of something viscous onto the grated floor. "Stay here. Try not to look like you're about to have your memories scrubbed." Aris flinched at the words, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn coat. Vespera saw the tremor in his jaw. He was a raw nerve, a man stretched thin over a frame of guilt and obsession. "Just be quick, Hroldar," he murmured. Vespera placed a steadying hand on Aris's arm, her touch light but firm, a calculated gesture. "Keep him grounded." "He knows this environment, Doctor. We do not. Let him work." Her own heart hammered a disciplined, controlled rhythm against her ribs. This place, this squalor, it was everything the architects taught her to despise, a festering pit of unregulated emotion and illicit exchange. And yet here she was, a willing participant, a traitor. Hroldar shuffled out of the shadows, his heavy boots making no sound on the corroded deck plating. He moved with a predator's economy, a creature of this twilight ecosystem. He stopped just outside the blue glow of the stall, not entering, merely letting his presence be known. The hooded figure didn't move. Then a voice, filtered through a modulator, scraped from a hidden speaker. "Robotic. The lost seek paths. Paths have a price." "I'm not lost," Hroldar grunted, his voice a low rumble. "I'm looking for a ghost, an architect, name of Valerius Otho." The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Around them, the bazaar's cacophony seemed to dim. Even from 20 meters away, Vespera felt the shift. Otho's name was a stone dropped into a stagnant pond. The broker's head tilted a fraction of a degree. "Robotic, a dangerous name. Ghosts from the spire cast long shadows down here. Information about them comes at a dangerous price." "I'm not scared of shadows," Hroldar shot back. "What's the price?" "Confirmation of location and 1 point of access, no more." "Fine. What is it?" Vespera watched the hooded figure extend one gloved hand, its fingers impossibly long and thin. "A component, a Generation 7 cryocoupler, unflagged. Its value is equivalent to the risk." Hroldar was still for a moment. Then he let out a short, harsh laugh. "A Gen 7? You might as well ask for the custodian's left lung. You're echo lost if you think anyone down here has one of those." "The price is the price," the speaker hissed, a hint of digital static betraying irritation. "Non-negotiable. Bring it or your ghost remains a rumor." The figure retracted its hand, the gesture a clear dismissal. Hroldar stood his ground for another second, then turned and stomped back toward them, his face a mask of frustration. He ducked back into the alcove with them. Dead end. A Gen 7 coupler. It's a high-spec piece of cryotech, military grade almost, used in the deep storage pods in the ossuary. You can't just buy one, not without an architect's requisition code. Aris's composure finally cracked. He pushed himself off the wall, his eyes wild. No, he's our only lead to understanding the archive. Valerius Otho designed the security protocols. We can't stop now." He began to pace the small space, his agitation a palpable force. "There has to be something else we can offer. Echoes, data. I have research notes." "Your notes are treason, Aris," Hroldar cut in, his voice sharp. "Worthless and dangerous. The broker wants hardware. Something clean, untraceable. Something we don't have." The weight of failure pressed down on Vespera. They had come so far, betrayed so much, only to be stopped by a simple, brutal transaction they couldn't afford. Anxiety, cold and familiar, coiled in her stomach. It was the same feeling she'd had watching the suppression squad cleanse the resonance echo of Lyra. A sense of overwhelming forces moving against her. She forced it down. Panic was a luxury. Analysis was a tool. "Be still," she said, her voice a low command. Aris stopped pacing, turning to her with a pleading look. Hroldar crossed his arms, scowling into the darkness. Vespera's gaze left them, sweeping across the bazaar. Her architect training, for all its ideological poison, had honed her senses to a razor's edge. She filtered the chaos, broke it down into components. Stall A, selling recycled nutrient paste. Stall B, modifying neural interface chips, illegal. Stall C, a gambling den, using the flashing lights of a repurposed slot machine to draw in dregs. The machine was protected by an automated security drone, a brutish, boxy thing patrolling a 3-meter radius on a ceiling-mounted track. It was an older model, a relic, likely pieced together from scrap. A single, glowing red optic swept back and forth, its servomotors emitting a low whir. It was ugly, functional. And jutting from its primary coolant assembly, nestled between armored plates caked with grime, was a small cylindrical component marked with a faint gold-stamped serial number. Her eyes narrowed. The housing, the connection ports, the heat sink fins, it was unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat. The anxiety didn't vanish, but it was transmuted, sharpened into a point. It became focus. It became opportunity. "Hroldar," she said, her voice tight with discovery. "What does a Gen 7 coupler look like, specifically?" He grunted. "Cylindrical, about 10 centimeters long, distinctive gold alloy heat sinks in a radial pattern. Why?" Vespera didn't answer. She simply raised her hand, her finger extending, pointing toward the gambling den and its tireless mechanical guard. "Look," she said. Aris and Hroldar followed her gaze. They saw the drone, the gambling den, the pathetic flashing lights. It took them a moment. Aris saw it first, his eyes widening in disbelief. Then Hroldar let out a low, slow whistle. There it was, the exact component they needed, not on a shelf, not in a vault, but humming away as part of a cheap security system, 20 meters away, in plain sight. They didn't have the price. The alleyway was a jagged scar of darkness, gouged between 2 humming tech stalls in the umbral bazaar. It smelled of spilled solvent and the acrid tang of ozone from a shorting power conduit, a sharp counterpoint to the cloying sweetness of recycled air that hung over Eiffelgard like a shroud. Light from the bazaar bled into the entrance, painting the corroded metal walls in shifting hues of faded gold and glitching cyan, but failed to penetrate the deeper gloom where Vespera Lyrian stood. Her breath plumed, a ghost in the chilled air. Her focus was absolute. Her target hovered 30 feet away. Its patrol route paused at the alley's dead end. It was an Architect standard-issue security drone, a CUST-IIIV model. Its chassis, once a pristine white, was now the color of old bone, streaked with grime. A single, cold blue optical sensor swept methodically from wall to wall, bathing the damp, fungus-spotted ferrocrete in sterile light. The low guttural whir of its grav plates was a familiar sound, a noise that had once represented order and the placid security of the Great Stillness. Now it was just an obstacle. In her hands she held a datapad salvaged by Hroldar from a heap of electronic refuse. It was a crude thing, its casing cracked and its screen prone to fits of static. But its core logic board was intact. Her fingers, long and steady, moved across the flickering display. The gestures were second nature, honed by years of sanctioned diagnostics and system maintenance in the pristine labs of the architects. The irony was a cold, hard knot in her gut. She was using the very discipline they had instilled in her, the surgical precision, the intimate knowledge of their network protocols, to commit a crime, to dismantle their control, one tiny component at a time. Every axiom of her former life screamed sacrilege. Order is tranquility. Anomaly is corruption. The system is sacrosanct. The words were like prayers beaten into her neural pathways by years of harmonization. But the memory of the ossuary, of the flickering resonance echo of a dead woman wearing Aris's wife's face, had been a stronger catechism. That event had not been an anomaly. It was a truth the architects were burying with high-frequency emitters and falsified reports. Her mentors, her superiors, they were not shepherds of stillness. They were jailers of ghosts. Her thumb hovered over a line of corrupted script on the datapad. This was the moment. The drone's internal chronometer would have it resuming its patrol in less than 40 seconds. The datapad's battery indicator was a sliver of angry red. There would be no second chances. "Isolate IFF, handshake," she murmured to herself, her voice barely a sound. Her fingers danced, composing a new reality in hexadecimal. She wasn't just typing code, she was weaving a lie. She pulled the drone's unique identification frequency from the ambient chatter of the bazaar's wireless traffic, a whisper of data hidden beneath layers of advertisements for synthetic protein and black market memory chips. It felt like plucking a single specific nerve from a spinal column. Now for the forgery. She built the spoofed maintenance packet from scratch, her muscle memory a frighteningly reliable guide. She knew the architect encryption keys by heart, the precise structure of a Level 3 diagnostic request. It was a request that could only come from a registered high-level maintenance terminal. The datapad in her hands was a glorified brick, but with the right sequence, it would sing the song of authority. The drone would have no choice but to listen. Static flared across the screen, eating a line of code. Vespera's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, chaotic rhythm, utterly at odds with the stillness she had once revered. She tapped the screen twice hard. The line reappeared. 30 seconds left. She inputted the final authorization string, a sequence she herself had helped design 2 years ago to prevent this exact kind of intrusion. "Stillness upon you," she breathed, the old greeting now a bitter curse. She pressed execute. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. The drone continued its sweep, its blue eye washing over her hiding spot. She flattened herself against the cold, damp wall, her body rigid, certain she had failed. The drone's engine pitch began to rise, the preamble to forward movement. Then it stopped. The whirring of the graph plates faltered, descending into a low, questioning hum. The blue optical sensor flickered, then shifted to a solid, placid amber. Diagnostic mode. A small service panel on its underbelly clicked open with a soft hiss, as if an offering. It was waiting for a technician. It was waiting for her.
She didn't hesitate. Moving from the shadows, Vespera was a study in fluid efficiency. Every movement was economical, precise. She unclipped a multi-phase expander from her belt, its metal cold against her palm. She didn't look at the amber eye, didn't allow herself to personify the machine. It was a system, and she was exploiting a flaw, nothing more. Her gloved fingers found the exposed compartment. Inside, nestled amongst neatly bundled fiber optics and cooling tubes, was the prize, the drone's primary cryo-coupler. It was a small, deceptively simple-looking cylinder of polished chrome and ceramic, no bigger than her thumb. It regulated the flow of liquid helium that kept the drone's sensitive sensor suite from overheating. Without it, the drone could still patrol, but its advanced detection capabilities, its ability to see through walls, to pick up micro-expressions and elevated heart rates, would be blind. Her work was surgical. She attached the spanner, gave it a half-twist to the left to release the pressure lock. A faint, almost inaudible sss of escaping gas whispered into the alley. One connector unclipped, then the second. She gently worked the coupler free from its housing, its surface instantly frosting as it met the humid air. She could feel the intense cold of it even through her glove. She held it in her palm for a moment, this piece of stolen order. It was an act of pure rebellion, a betrayal of every principle she had ever held. It was sabotage. It was theft. And it felt correct. It felt like taking a breath after being held underwater for a lifetime. The chaos Aris and Hroldar represented was terrifying, but the architect's sterile, enforced peace was a lie. This small act of calculated defiance felt like the first honest thing she had done in years. With the coupler safely stowed in a lead-lined pocket inside her jacket, she snapped the service panel shut. The click echoed lightly in the confines of the alley. The drone remained inert, its amber eye glowing dumbly, waiting for a repair that would never come. In 17 minutes, its system would register a critical hardware failure, and it would automatically return to its assigned maintenance bay, leaving a temporary but crucial gap in the bazaar's surveillance grid, a gap they desperately needed. She retreated back into the deepest part of the shadow, her gaze locked on the crippled machine. The old Vespera, the faithful technician, would have been horrified. She would have reported the vulnerability, patched it, and submitted a 3-part report on protocol failure. That Vespera was gone, dispersed like a resonance echo. A flicker of movement at her lips, too small to be a smile, too sharp to be anything else. It was a grimace of triumphant resolve. The skills the architects gave her were a weapon, and she had just learned how to aim it back at them. Turning her back on the drone, she melted into the mouth of the alley, becoming just another face in the endless, desperate stream of Aethelgard's forgotten souls. The stillness was broken. The air thinned as they climbed, but the quality didn't improve. Here, in the forgotten upper latticework of the bazaar, the station's perpetual scent of ozone and formaldehyde was tainted by a dozen other competing stinks. Charred protein from unlicensed food stalls, the sweat of too many bodies in too little space, the sharp tang of homemade intoxicants. Hroldar led them through the maze of makeshift walkways and gantries with a scavenger's certainty, his heavy boots clanging on the corroded metal.
Hope, Aris knew, was a dangerous currency on Aethelgard, but a sliver of it burned in his chest. A fragile, flickering thing. Valerius Otho. The name was a ghost, an architect who had supposedly gone echo-lost years ago, vanished from the Order's immaculate records. Kaelis Warren had sworn he was not lost, but hiding, a cartographer of the very madness they were trying to navigate. Here, Hroldar grunted, stopping before a featureless slab of rust-pitted steel. It was a maintenance access point, long ago sealed and forgotten. A crude keypad, scabbed onto the wall beside it with resin and wires, blinked a single red light. Hroldar didn't bother with it. He produced a power spanner from his coat, jammed it into a barely visible seam, and twisted. "Charming," Vespera murmured, her voice flat. She stood a pace behind Aris, a statue of composure, but he could see the tension in the line of her jaw. For her, this was a descent into a hell she had only ever observed from a sterile booth. Aris pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. The hope in his chest flared into something akin to awe. It wasn't an archive nook. It was a brain, a feverish, sprawling, externalized mind. The cramped space was suffocatingly hot, lit by the frantic dance of data streams on a dozen mismatched monitors. Cables, thick as pythons, writhed across the floor and ceiling, feeding a central stack of humming, groaning server racks. But it was the walls that seized his attention. Every square inch was covered in printouts, hand-scrawled diagrams and star charts overlaid with impossibly complex equations. Lines of red string connected points across the sprawling maps, not between stars, but between cryogenic pods in the ossuary levels. Timelines of resonance events were meticulously plotted, with waveforms and energy readings noted in a tiny, obsessive script. It was the most beautiful, terrifying thing Aris had ever seen. It was his own obsession, given form. At the center of this web sat a man. Gaunt was too gentle a word. He was skeletal, his skin a waxy, translucent sheath over sharp bones. His gray hair was a wild mess, and his eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted between screens. A thin silver circlet was clamped to his temples, a jury-rigged neural interface that pulsed with a faint blue light. Valerius Otho didn't look up. "We're looking for Valerius Otho," Aris began, his voice softer than he intended. It felt like trespassing in a sacred space. The man's fingers continued to dance across a holographic keyboard projected over his lap. "He's not here. He's lost. Go away." The voice was a dry rasp, the sound of disuse. "We know who you are," Aris pressed, stepping carefully over a coil of cables. "We need your help. We're investigating the source of resonance." That got a reaction. The typing stopped. The head swiveled toward them with a slow mechanical creak. His eyes, burning with a terrible lucid fire, fixed on Aris. "Investigating? You don't investigate a hurricane. You chart its path and pray it doesn't notice you."
"We think we can do more than that," Aris said, gesturing to the walls. This is incredible. You understand it, the patterns, the energy signatures. We believe there's an archive, a source." Otho's gaze flickered from Aris to Hroldar, whom he dismissed with a contemptuous sniff, and then it landed on Vespera. His entire body went rigid, The frantic energy vanished, replaced by a stillness more alarming than his earlier mania. His eyes narrowed, not on her face, but on her posture. The perfect, economical stillness of her stance. The way her hands were held, relaxed but ready, at her sides. The subtle, ramrod straightness of her spine. A dry, clicking laugh escaped his throat. It was a horrifying sound, devoid of humor. "Oh, you clever, clever bastards." "What?" Aris asked, confused. "A trap," Otho whispered, his gaze locked on Vespera. He pointed a trembling skeletal finger at her. "You bring her? Here? To my door?" "She's with us," Hroldar growled from the doorway. "She's no friend of the Order anymore." "Number friend?" Otho spat, the word dripping with venom. "You can't wash that stench off. It's in the bones. I can see it. The great stillness, the discipline. They train it into you until you forget how to be human. You think I don't know one of my own?" Vespera finally spoke, her voice as cold and precise as a scalpel. "I have renounced the architects. My clearance is revoked. I am marked for erasure." "A convincing legend," Otho shot back, his voice rising in pitch. "A perfect cover story to root out the last dissenter who knows what they really did, the last one who can read the original sin in the signal. Did they promise you reinstatement, a return to your precious, sterile world, if you brought them the head of the madman in the walls?" He scrambled to his feet, a scarecrow of a man animated by pure paranoia. He stabbed a button on his console. "This is not a trap," Aris insisted, raising his hands. The hope was draining away, replaced by the cold stone of frustration. "We need your knowledge of the archives, the security protocols, the location of the foundational data."
"There is no foundational data," Otho shrieked. "There is only the signal, and it remembers. You think you're hunting it? You absolute echo-lost fools! It has been hunting you since the day Ethelgard bled into this orbit."
"Listen to me," Vespera said, taking a step forward. Her discipline was her curse. Every calm, controlled motion only confirmed Otho's suspicions. "No," he shouted, fumbling with a heavy switch on the server rack. A loud, oscillating hum began to build. "Get out! Get out before I wipe this entire sector! You think your little defector can protect you from me? I built the firewalls she was taught to maintain. I know the back doors to the back doors." Aris felt Hroldar's hand grip his shoulder, pulling him back. He spooked. "We're done here, Aris." "Valerius, please," Aris begged. One last desperate attempt. "Lyra, my wife. I saw her. Her echo." Otho froze. For a single heart-stopping second, the madness in his eyes cleared, replaced with something that looked tragically like pity. "Then you are already lost. It has you. It's wearing her memory to puppet your guilt." Then the paranoia slammed back into place. He threw the switch. A deafening klaxon blared, and the lights in the cramped den flickered violently. A metallic shutter began to descend over the inside of the doorway. "Go," Hroldar yelled, shoving Aris and Vespera out into the walkway. They stumbled back as the heavy shutter slammed down with a final, booming clang of finality. The klaxon cut off. Silence returned, thick and absolute. They were left in the grimy corridor, the wave of hot air gone, the frenetic energy of the den sealed away. The fragile hope Aris had nurtured was not just extinguished, it was crushed. They were back where they started, only now they knew their one potential key was a paranoid madman locked in a box of his own making. Aris leaned against the cold metal wall, the echoes of Otho's words ringing in his head. "It's wearing her memory to puppet your guilt."
Well, Hroldar grunted, dusting rust from his hands. That went well.
The air in the den was a blasphemy against Aethelgard. It smelled of ozone, yes, but also of soldering flux, heated metal, and something else Vespera couldn't place, the dry, sterile scent of authentic memory, of data slates older than the Great Stillness itself. Valerius Otho, a specter in his own meticulously organized tomb, didn't even look at them. He remained hunched over a workbench where a filigree of copper wires and glowing crystals was laid out like a dissected insect. "It's not a glitch, it's a language," Aris pleaded, his voice thin with desperation, echoing slightly in the cramped space. "The patterns, the frequencies, they're too complex for a simple system failure. You dedicated your life to this, to understanding neural architecture. You must see." Otho's hand, gnarled and stained with silver solder, moved with reptilian speed, adjusting a tiny diode. "I see a disgraced xenobiologist and a rust-garden scavenger, led by an echo-lost girl, standing in my refuge," he rasped, the words brittle as old plastic. "You see what you want to see, Doctor, a ghost in the machine to absolve your own. I am no longer in the business of chasing phantoms." The dismissal was a physical force, pressing the hope from the room. Aris deflated, his shoulders slumping. Hroldar, who had been a monolith of scarred flesh and silent judgment in the corner, merely grunted, the sound a confirmation of his own deep-seated cynicism. This was a waste of time. Despair, cold and familiar, coiled in Vespera's stomach. But it was a calculated despair. She had expected this. She took a single step forward, the soft scuff of her boot sole unnaturally loud.
She straightened her spine, her posture shifting from that of a fugitive to something else, something older. The muscle memory of her former life took over. "Stillness upon your work, Valerius Otho," she said. The words were formal, archaic, a piece of architect cant, almost never used outside the high enclaves. Otho's hand froze over his workbench. The subtle hum of his custom air scrubber seemed to deepen. "I am Vespera, she continued, the name feeling heavy and alien in her mouth. 4th Echelon Technician, Mnemonic Division. Serial number 734 Kilo Delta. I was assigned to the suppression and analysis team for resonance events in Sector Gamma 9, the ossuary levels." Every word was a nail in her own coffin. If Otho betrayed them, this confession would be her death warrant, broadcast across the station's network before her body was cold. Aris stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Otho turned his head slowly, just enough to fix one pale, rheumy eye on her. The skin around it was a roadmap of sleepless nights and bitter decades. "There are no 4th Echelon technicians named Vespera in the current registry," he stated, his voice flat. "A test. Because I am a fugitive." Vespera met his gaze without flinching. "Flagged for immediate neural harmonization. For the same reason you were exiled. For heresy." She saw a flicker in that cold eye. Not interest. Not yet. Vindication. 2 cycles ago, she began, her voice dropping, becoming clinical, the voice of a technician filing a report. 2 cycles ago, I was assigned to observe the cleansing of a Level 4 event, a spontaneous mnemonic formation. During the procedure, the subject,
Dr. Thorne, was discovered in a restricted zone. My commander, First Adjudicator Pilo, ordered an immediate field harmonization to preserve operational security. She paused. The memory was a shard of ice in her mind. The procedure failed. A secondary resonance wave, of an order I have never witnessed, hijacked the harmonization field. It interfaced. Interfaced. Otho's voice was sharper now, cutting through the low hum of the room. Specify the vector.
It used the harmonization carrier wave as a conduit, Vespera said, the technical jargon flowing with grim ease. It cross-referenced the mnemonic data of the two subjects present, myself and Dr. Thorne, with its own fragmented source in the ossuary. It created a composite echo. She swallowed, the clinical facade cracking for just a moment. The air felt thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and the ghosts of dead conversations. I saw an echo of his dead wife, Aris's Lyra, but it spoke to me with the voice of my grandmother. It used her name for me, a name no one has spoken in 20 years, a name that exists on no active record. The den was utterly silent. The only sound was a faint, rhythmic drip of condensation somewhere outside the sealed door. Otho had turned fully now, his body angled towards her. His face, illuminated by the ghostly blue light of his workbench, was a mask of intense predatory focus. "They called it ontological corruption," he breathed, the words a ghost of an old argument. "They said the echoes were firewalls, failing protocols, that they couldn't learn, that they couldn't access sealed memory." "They lied," Vespera stated, the two words landing with the finality of a closing airlock. "They are lying still. The lie is collapsing. This resonance, it isn't just a memory of the dead. It's becoming a memory of the living, too. It's weaving them together. They tried to wipe the event from my mind, Otho. They tried to harmonize me for seeing the proof of your life's work, and they failed." A dry, rasping sound escaped Otho's throat. It was a terrible noise, like stones grinding together, and it took Vespera a moment to realize he was laughing. It was a laugh devoid of joy, a pure, corrosive expression of absolute vindication. He had been right. All these years, in this metal coffin, surrounded by his forbidden knowledge, he had been right. He pushed himself to his feet. He was taller than she'd expected, though stooped with age, his old architect's coat hanging loosely on his skeletal frame. His eyes, now clear and frighteningly alert, moved from Vespera's face to Aris's stunned expression to Hrodar's wary stillness. "So, the rot has finally reached the heartwood," he whispered, a dark satisfaction coloring his tone. The flicker of trust she had hoped for was there, but it was not a comforting light. It was the cold, hungry gleam of a predator that has just caught the scent of blood after years of starvation. He took a step towards them, his gaze locking back onto Vespera. "You did not come to my door seeking absolution, Technician Lyrian. Those who break with the order never do. You've come for a key. You've come for a way into the heart of the lie, and you believe I have it." The alert was a single crimson rune pulsing on Valerius Otho's main console, a silent scream in a room choking on the hum of 1,000 dying machines.
Outside, beyond the reinforced plasteel of the archivist's den, the familiar cacophony of the bazaar had curdled. The haggling, the distant clang of a recycler, the tinny jingle of a noodle vendor's chime, it was all being systematically silenced. In its place, a new sound grew, the synchronized, heavy tread of magnetic boots on grated flooring, a drumbeat for the damned. "It's everything," Otho whispered, his voice thin as recycled paper. He wasn't looking at us, but at the towering server racks that lined his circular chamber like the ribs of some colossal fossilized beast. Each one blinked with a constellation of amber and green LEDs, a galaxy of forbidden knowledge. 187 years of unfiltered station logs, cross-referenced comms traffic from the founding, the original colonial data. My breath hitched. The original data, the very thing the architects built their empire of lies upon, the key, the reason we were here. "And it will all make for a very pretty late show when they slag this place from orbit," Hroldar Brecker rasped, his back to the main door, one hand resting on the hilt of a wicked-looking salvage blade. His scarred face was a mask of grim impatience. "We don't have time for a history lesson, old man." The rhythmic stumping grew louder, closer. Thump. Thump. It wasn't a patrol. It was a containment team, an eraser squad. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots, a death knell traveling up my spine.
"They can't. They wouldn't," Otho stammered, running a trembling hand through his shock of white hair. This is history, our history. To destroy it would be—" "Tuesday," Hroldar cut in, his voice dropping to a low growl. He stalked across the room and grabbed the front of Otho's worn synth-wool robe. The archivist, a man who commanded an archive of forgotten truths, squeaked like a frightened rodent. "Listen to me, you echo-lost relic. You have two choices. You come with us right now through a sewer pipe that smells worse than a dreg's funeral, or you stay here and greet your old friends." He jerked his head toward the door. "And they will sit you in a harmonization chair. They'll put a crown of needles on your head, and they will turn the dial until every memory, every bit of this precious history you've hoarded is wiped clean. They won't just kill you. They will make it so you never were." Hroldar words were brutal, but I saw the truth of them reflected in Vespera's face. She stood near the console, her expression a terrifying fusion of her past and present. Her body was coiled with the tension of a fugitive, but her eyes tracked the sounds from outside with the cold, analytical focus of the architect she used to be. "He's right, Valerius," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the servers. "2 fire teams, standard pincer formation. They'll breach the outer bazaar entrances simultaneously to create a kill box. Then they'll cut main power to this sector." The crimson rune on the console flickered and died. The room's primary lights guttered, plunging us into the eerie emergency glow of the server LEDs. "There! Too late. We're on local power only. We have maybe 20 seconds before they are at your door." Otho's face was a ruin. The fear in his eyes was something I recognized intimately. It wasn't the fear of pain or even death. It was the fear of erasure, the existential dread of being hollowed out, your entire identity scooped out and replaced with the Great Stillness. It was the same violation I felt every time Lyra's echo appeared, her memory a puppet for some unknown force. To lose a memory was to lose a piece of your soul, to have it stolen and overwritten. That was damnation. Thump, 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 thump. The sound was directly outside now, a monstrous heartbeat against the door.
A loud metallic crack echoed through the chamber as a breaching charge was set. "Time's up," Hroldar snarled, releasing Otho and turning toward a section of wall covered in peeling schematics. "Vespera, Aris, get ready!" But Otho didn't move. He stood frozen, his gaze sweeping across his life's work one last time. The sum of a man's existence condensed into magnetic storage and flickering lights, all of it about to be rendered into less than static. I saw the surrender in his eyes, the weight of it all crushing him. Then a new sound cut through the tension, a high-frequency whine just at the edge of hearing, the sound of a suppression field spooling up, the sound of minds being wiped clean. That sound broke him. With a strangled cry, Otho lunged, not for the door, not for us, but for a single unremarkable server rack tucked away in a dusty alcove. His frail hands, suddenly imbued with desperate strength, fumbled at a locked panel. He bypassed it with a series of frantic practice gestures. Inside, instead of a bank of drives, was a single reinforced slot. "Otho, now!" Hroldar bellowed, prying a large ventilation grate from the wall with a groan of tortured metal. A wave of cool, damp air, smelling of rust and decay, washed over us. A percussive boom shook the entire chamber, blasting the main door inward in a shower of sparks and molten slag. Through the smoke, I saw them, silhouettes clad in sterile white armor, their featureless helmets turning the emergency light into a blinding glare. The high-frequency whine intensified into a physical pressure, making my teeth ache and my vision swim. Just as the first enforcer stepped through the breach, Otho ripped a thick, dark gray data slate from the server. He clutched it to his chest like a holy text. "Go!" Vespera screamed, her architect's calm shattered. She was already scrambling into the dark opening Hroldar had revealed. Hroldar grabbed Otho by the collar and practically threw him into the shaft after her. The old man went with a yelp of surprise, the precious slate held tight. "Aris!" screaming, "move your ass!"
I took one last look. The white-armored figures were advancing, their weapons raised. They weren't rifles. They were emitters, focused horns designed to project the harmonization frequency, to boil away a personality like water from a pan. The beautiful, blinking galaxy of Otho's archive began to flicker and die as they swept the room, row by row. I dove headfirst into the vent, the rough metal scraping my jacket. Hroldar was right behind me, pulling the heavy grate back into place. For a fraction of a second, the light from the raid flooded the shaft, illuminating Vespera and Otho struggling to crawl deeper into the darkness. Then Hroldar slammed the grate shut. Click. The world vanished. We were plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. The only sounds were the frantic, ragged gasps of our own breath, the terrified pounding of my heart in my ears, and, echoing from the other side of the grate, the piercing, soul-screaming whine of absolute silence being enforced. The grate slammed shut behind Hroldar, the screech of corroded metal echoing for a moment before being swallowed by the oppressive dark. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the ragged chorus of 4 sets of lungs gasping for air that tasted of rust and century-old dust. Aris pressed his back against the cold, grimy wall of the maintenance conduit, the ridges of a bundled cable loom digging into his spine. Each breath was a fire in his chest, a testament to a sprint he thought would never end. He slid down the wall, his boots scraping on the grated floor, until he was sitting in the filth. The space was barely wide enough for 2 men to stand abreast. Above, A single grime-caked emergency light strip cast a sickly yellow pall over them, just enough to paint their faces in shades of exhaustion and fear. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and acrid like old blood. Across from him, Vespera knelt, one hand braced against the floor, her eyes closed. The disciplined mask of the architect-technician was gone, shattered. In its place was the pale, drawn face of a woman who had just watched her entire world burn. Her uniform, once a symbol of authority, was now stained and torn at the sleeve. She was one of them now, a fugitive.
Hroldar, ever the creature of shadows and survival, was already on his feet, his back to the grate, listening. His head was cocked, his body a study in tense stillness. He didn't seem out of breath at all, merely annoyed at the exertion. He was at home here, in the station's grimy guts. Aris realized, with a jolt of unease, that he and Vespera were tourists in Hroldar's world. And then there was the fourth, Valerius Otho, the exiled architect. He leaned against the opposite wall, his fine spun robes looking absurdly out of place amidst the decay. His face, usually a canvas of academic placidity, was slick with sweat, his silver hair disheveled. He met Aris's gaze, and in his eyes Aris saw not the panic he expected, but the terrifying clarity of a man who has just irrevocably crossed a line. "Are they gone?" Vespera's voice was a dry rasp. Hroldar didn't turn. "The patrol pattern will double back in 7 minutes. Their clankers aren't programmed for subconduit sweeps. They'll assume we went up, toward the spire. They always assume you run up." "But they know he is with us," Aris said, his voice low. He nodded toward Otho. "They know what he has." "Then they won't be assuming for long," Hroldar grunted, finally turning from the grate. His eyes, accustomed to the dim light of the rust gardens, scanned the three of them with a scavenger's appraisal. He lingered on Otho. "An architect. Never thought I'd be hiding in a sewer pipe with one of you voluntarily." Otho straightened up, brushing a smear of grime from his sleeve with a gesture of innate, almost unconscious dignity. "And I never thought I'd be indebted to a man who smells of hydroponic rot and desperation. It seems we are all expanding our horizons." Hroldar let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. "Just make sure your horizons are worth the price. The dregs have a saying, truth costs more than echoes, and you can't eat it." "This truth," Otho said, his voice dropping, losing its academic lilt and taking on a steely edge, "is not for eating. It's for burning down the house that feeds us lies." With that, he unclasped the leather satchel he'd protected during their frantic escape. He produced a data slate, its casing a dark, matte alloy, unlike the cheaper plastics of standard-issue tech. It was architect grade, forbidden. "We have little time," Otho stated, his gaze sweeping over them. "What I am about to show you is the culmination of my life's work as a cartographer of Aethelgard's secrets. I built this archive as a fail-safe against my own order." His thumb swiped across the dark screen. The slate hummed, a low thrum that vibrated through the grated floor.
A single beam of pale blue light shot from the emitter, hitting the opposite wall and blossoming outward. Dust motes, ancient and undisturbed for decades, danced in the beam like constellations. The light coalesced, forming a complex, three-dimensional schematic that filled the conduit. It pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow, illuminating their faces in stark blue and shadow. Aris leaned forward, mesmerized. It was the ossuary, but it was not the ossuary he knew. This was a vision of the station's soul, a web of impossible complexity. The public levels and cryochambers were there, rendered in thin skeletal lines, but beneath and between them was a secret anatomy. A circulatory system of forgotten maintenance shafts, redundant power conduits, decommissioned server nodes, and, most incredibly, cavernous unlisted chambers from the station's initial construction phase. They were black voids on the map, labeled only with archaic project codenames. "Gods!" Vespera breathed, her training kicking in. She pointed a trembling finger. "This conduit, it runs parallel to the primary cryocoolant line, but this junction, it's not on any official schematic. It's been walled off." "Walled off after the Kepler 186F incident," Otho confirmed, his voice a low murmur. He manipulated the projection, zooming in. The map rotated, revealing structural weaknesses in vivid red. They sealed more than half of the lower ossuary, turning it into a tomb within a tomb, but they couldn't erase its bones. Hroldar, his cynicism momentarily forgotten, stared at the glowing lattice. "These vents," he said, pointing to a network of tiny hair-like lines, "waste heat and gas recyclers. They connect the old labs directly to the lower rust gardens. They're too small for a man, but not for a drone or a targeted overload." The desperation that had been a knot in Aris's stomach began to loosen, replaced by something colder, heavier, a grim resolve. This was it. This glowing, intricate ghost was the key, his path back to the Echo, back to Lyra. The schematic wasn't just steel and wire, it was a promise. An answer lay somewhere in that web of lies and sealed off history. He looked at the faces around him, lit by the impossible map. Vespera, the betrayed soldier, her expression a mixture of terror and fierce determination. Hroldar, the survivor, already calculating angles and odds, his pragmatic mind a weapon in itself. Otto, the fallen priest, offering up his heresy as their only salvation. They were four fugitives in a dusty pipe, hunted by the most powerful force on Aethelgard. Their chances were infinitesimal. They would likely die in the cold, silent dark of the station's underbelly. But as Aris traced a hidden passage with his eyes, one that led directly to the central data archive, the heart of the lie, he felt no fear, only a profound, chilling sense of purpose. The resonance had called to him with his dead wife's voice, and now he had a map to answer it. Otto looked at him, then at the others. His voice was quiet, but it filled the small space with the weight of their decision. "The archive is here," he said, his finger indicating a heavily fortified node deep within the sealed-off zone. "Guarded by systems I designed and men I once called brothers. To reach it is madness." Aris met his gaze, the blue light of the map reflected in his pupils. "Then we are mad," he said. "Show us the way in."